Welcome back to Driven by Dreams. Today's guest is Alice Heiman, Chief Sales Energizer and a recognized expert in elevating B2B sales for high-growth companies. Known for her ability to energize sales organizations and craft strategies that drive new business and grow existing accounts, Alice works closely with CEOs and sales leaders to boost their company valuation. She's also the host of the popular Sales Talk for CEOs podcast and an advocate for local entrepreneurs, teaching at the University of Nevada and serving on several company boards. You're in for an inspiring conversation with insights you can apply to your own journey. Hi, Alice.
Hi.
I'm excited to connect with you today and learn more about you and your experiences.
Well, thank you very much for having me on the show.
Can you share a little about yourself?
Well, sure. I'm an entrepreneur, and I know this show is about entrepreneurs. I currently own a company, which is my name, Alice Heiman LLC, and I've had that company for over 30 years now, so a long time. I live in Reno, Nevada, in the Sierra Nevada mountains at 5,300 feet. It's absolutely beautiful here. I have 4 grown boys and 2 beautiful grandchildren and another one on the way. So those are some personal things about me as well. I love to ski and sail. Those are things I do in my spare time. And I also love to read. As far as being an entrepreneur, I think I was born that way. I've always been a starter of things. I believe I'm a catalyst. I love to make things happen. And so even as a child, I was busy starting things, forming things, groups and otherwise. But my first real entrepreneurial venture was probably in the 90s. I did a few things while I was in college that were rather entrepreneurial, but not actually starting a business. Now, when I was young, which was a long time ago, the word entrepreneur wasn't even something anyone ever said. Like I had never heard that word until I was much older. But we were doing a lot of fun things, in college and starting a lot of things. And then after college, I was a teacher. So I went to school to be a teacher and I got an undergraduate degree in elementary ed and special ed. And then I started teaching in Chicago and at the same time was getting a master's degree. So I grew up in New Jersey for 18 years, but then ended up in the Midwest because I went to college there. And after college, I went to Chicago and worked for several years. And during that time, I didn't have a business, but I was very entrepreneurial. I worked at a store that some of you will recognize, Crate and Barrel. And it was a startup back then. It was very brand new. And I worked there and had a lot of fun doing that. And I was always, again, starting things. Oh, I saw that there was no soccer league in the town that I was living in, which was Evanston. And so I got together with some of my friends and started a soccer league. So familiar with starting things. So then moved to California and was still teaching, but also started a business. So I wrote a business plan, got it funded, and opened Book Adventures. And that was my first for-profit company. However, I didn't make a profit, so I had to close that business 3 years later because it was draining me financially. So as we say, as we entrepreneurs say, failure is a good thing, right? Fail fast. So moving on to other things. But also while I was doing that business, I started a mother's club. There was sort of a little mother's club, but I had just had a child and I was like, oh my gosh, I need to know other moms and we need to help each other. So I started the Mount Diablo Mothers Club and it grew and grew and grew to like 600 members. And then finally we had to make smaller groups because it was too many and then just kind of grew all over the region. So that was a nonprofit. And after that, when I closed the Book Adventures, I decided that I didn't want to go back to teaching. And so my dad and stepmom had been asking me to come and work for their company. They're entrepreneurs. They started a company called Miller Heiman, which is a world-renowned sales training company now owned by Korn Ferry. And I decided to go ahead and go work for them. So that had me move from, back to Chicago. I was in Chicago. And when I had been there a couple of years, my whole family had moved to the West Coast, and I decided, okay, I'm going to move to the West Coast. But I was still teaching. I was in Northern California, and I was still teaching. But then I was around my father's business all the time and helping him with projects. And so then he decided he wanted me to come work for him full time. But by that time, he had moved the company to Reno, Nevada, where I live now. That was in 1992. And I moved in 1994 to work with my parents, who were entrepreneurs, and help them grow their company and exit. So I got to learn how to exit a company in a good way. I exited a company, my own company, Book Adventures, but I had to close it. It was a little bit of a different exit, not a happy exit. But then my parents got to have a great exit from their company. So when they did that, I started the company that I have now in 1997. And still doing similar things. So what I do is I am a sales strategist, and I consult the CEOs and their leadership team of tech companies who have a business to business complex sale, and I help them increase their sales so the valuation of their company will increase.
Well, thank you so much for sharing about yourself, Alice. So you mentioned that you often work with high growth companies. What role does sales play in accelerating growth in these types of businesses?
Well, it's the way that they grow, right? I mean, without sales, your company doesn't grow. You may have some existing customers that are paying you monthly or annually. So you have MRR, monthly recurring revenue, or ARR, annual recurring revenue. And that will maybe pay some of the bills, but to continue to keep growing, you have to keep selling. So in the very beginning, as a startup, you have nothing, right? And so you've got to get out there and sell so you can get some revenue coming in. And then once that revenue is coming in, you want to keep growing, especially the investors. So sales is critical to the growth of any startup.
What's the most common challenge that you see in sales organizations today?
Oh my goodness. I mean, there's just so many, really. I see some challenges with sales leadership where they don't really know how to coach and manage a peak performing team. I see that sales leaders don't really know how to coach deals or coach the pipeline well. I see that salespeople have not been trained sufficiently or with modern sales methods so that they can approach the customer the way that they want to be approached. And I see that sales is operating in a silo and not communicating well or aligning with the other departments they need to align with in order to give the customer an exceptional experience.
With these problems, how do you know if it's a marketing problem or a sales issue?
Well, but I mean, it's pretty clear usually if marketing problems are things that have to do with demand gen and lead flow, right? So if marketing isn't doing their job, there are no inbound leads. And so that's very clear. When there's no inbound leads, marketing isn't doing their job. If there are trade shows or events, marketing has to manage those. Now, in much smaller organizations, a lot of times the salespeople have to manage these things as well. But then the salespeople are doing marketing tasks, but they still have to do them. Someone has to do them, right? You know that it's a sales problem when sellers are not meeting their goals, or some people call it a quota, when teams are not performing well, when the customers are upset. Sometimes it has to do with sales. Sometimes it might be customer support or customer success, but typically that's not a marketing issue. So you can usually see pretty clearly by diagnosing the problem where the root cause is. And to prevent these kinds of problems, we just really need to stay close to our customer, understand them, understand how they want to buy from us, and meet them where they are.
So, what do you have to do to keep a consistent sales pipeline? And for those of our audience who don't know, what exactly is a sales pipeline?
Yeah, so in sales, our job is to get people interested. That's kind of marketing's job, but it's partly sales job too, to get people interested in what you're selling, right? So marketing's job is they have to get out the brand so people know the brand, they know the people, they know what is available, right? That's marketing's job, and to get them interested. And then when they're interested, the salespeople have an opportunity to sell them something, right? So once you have an opportunity, then you need to track those opportunities. So let's say you have 10 salespeople and each of them have 100 opportunities. You would manage that in a pipeline, or I call it a funnel. And so that's just simply, it could be a spreadsheet or it could be in a pipeline management tool, or some people call a CRM, customer relationship management software. So what you're doing is basically listing all of the opportunities, who you're going to sell to, what you're going to sell them, the dollar amount, when you're going to sell it to them by, right? The close date, and then your next action and the date of your next action. And you're tracking all of those opportunities. You could do that on a spreadsheet, right? You could do it in a CRM. You could do it in a pipeline manager. But you have to keep track of all of the opportunities that the sellers have. And they need to look at each opportunity, determine where it is, what stage it's in, and continue moving it forward until they either close the deal or lose the deal. So pipeline management is really critical. We don't want to lose any opportunities, and we also want to be able to coach the sellers on those opportunities so they have a better chance of closing them.
Well, thank you for explaining that, Alice. So, what are different sales approaches that you would recommend to make sales work for anyone who's starting their company and also for growing their company?
Well, I can only talk about a business to business complex sale because that's where I work, right? Most business to business sales are similar, but when it's a complex sale, meaning very high dollar stakes. So this is not a $5, $10, or even a $10,000 deal. This is a deal or an opportunity that's going to bring hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars to a company, right? And what else makes it complex is it takes a long time. It doesn't just you talk to somebody one day and they buy the next. No, that's kind of a transactional sale. It could take months or even years to work through all the things that need to happen in order to close this deal. There are also technical complexities that you have to consider, and there are a lot of people involved on the seller side and on the buyer side. So in those big complex deals, right, we're trying to move those forward, and to keep the pipeline full for those, sellers have to go to trade shows, they have to go to industry events, they have to use social media, especially LinkedIn, to meet people. They might use other tools like Connect the Dots in order to find who people that they know other people that they can introduce them to, but they have to be out there trying to meet people all the time, right? To keep the pipeline full. They also have to do some cold outreach, usually some sort of campaigns to companies that are likely to buy from them. So they have to do good research and find these companies and figure out who the people are and try to connect with them in different ways and have conversations with them. And marketing has a big role to play in keeping the pipeline full. If marketing isn't doing their job, it makes it very hard on the salespeople. And for salespeople to constantly be prospecting for brand new business and also continue moving the opportunities they have through the pipeline, it's a balancing act. And that's why managers have to be really good at managing that. But if marketing does their job well, there's a steady flow of leads coming into salespeople. And those leads are people who are actually interested in talking to a seller about buying something.
Well, I've heard that sales often gets a bad reputation, especially with younger generations who don't like the idea of having something sold to them. So in a world driven by social media and AI, how should we rethink the concept of sales?
Well, everybody likes to buy things. but most people don't want to be sold to. However, people do like assistance when they're buying something complicated. I think that when you're making a transaction, you're buying something for yourself personally, you might not need a salesperson at all. You might be able to go online and get all the information you need to make a good decision. But sometimes it's more complicated and you'd like to actually talk to an expert who knows something. And that's where sales comes in. I think that we need to rethink sales in this way. We are helping someone solve a problem. We're not trying to just sell them something, right? We're trying to help them solve a problem. And if we can solve it, great. And if we can't sell them anything. So we need to be curious and learn so that we can help them make a good decision. So again, if you're buying something for yourself and you can get it online without ever talking to anyone, wonderful, go do it. But in most businesses, when they're buying big machinery, software for 5,000 people, new ways of doing things, right? They're buying something that's complex and expensive. They're not going to be able to get all the information off a website that they need to choose wisely. And they're going to have to compare several vendors, right? There will be maybe not only different vendors, but several different ways to solve the same thing. Maybe they can solve it internally. Maybe they need to look at these 3 outside vendors, or maybe there's another whole way over here that they could solve it that they hadn't even thought of. So they definitely will need some help with that. And what they want is someone who has their best interest in mind, who cares about them, and who cares that they get the right solution and they're not just trying to sell something to them.
Well, thank you for clearing up that, Alice. As someone who's deeply involved in strategizing with CEOs, what do you believe are some of the most critical shifts that they can make to elevate their sales team?
Well, I think that CEOs need to shift their own mindset. For one thing, when they were founders, they may have sold a certain way, which was 10 years ago or more, or even 5 years ago. And those methods might not work anymore. So they have to let go of that. And they need to really understand the customer and what the customer is thinking, what the customer needs, why the customer might want to buy from them, how the customer wants to buy. As the CEO, really understanding that, then you can orchestrate all the departments in your company that touch the customer. And you can make sure that they are helping the customer along the journey from hello to I'm your loyal customer, right? Because it doesn't stop when you sell them something. They need to be onboarded. They need to have user adoption. They need to buy more things or add-ons. They need to be successful using what you sold them. And as a CEO, that's your most important job in sales, is to make sure that the customers are successful using what you sold them. And that means everyone who's touching the customer has to do their job really well, because we don't want just a list of customers. We want a list of successful customers, because successful customers will continue to buy, they'll buy more, and they'll tell others, which helps our business grow.
Well, what's the best piece of sales advice that you've ever received, and how did you apply it in your career?
I've received so much sales advice over the years. I mean, I'm old. So I've been doing this a long time. I think that the best sales advice really that anyone could give is sell something that excites you, that you're interested in, that you can dive into, and sell to people you care about. If you can't do that, then leave that job and go get a better job, right? So as a salesperson, you just really have to care about the people that you're selling to, and that they get their problems solved and meet their goals. And you should be excited about what you're selling to them and how it solves their problems.
Well, your advice is really great, and I can see why your podcast has become so popular. So, what inspired you to start Sales Talk for CEOs, and how has it grown over time?
Well, I started it about 3 years ago, and honestly, the reason I started it is because I didn't want to write a book, but I wanted more notoriety or popularity, right? I wanted to grow a bigger tribe. I wanted more CEOs to know me. So I thought, wow, podcasting has really become a thing, and I'm pretty good on camera. So why don't I do that? And so I thought about the show and what it would be. I had a good friend, Park Howell, who helped me name the show. And we kept it simple because I came up with a lot of other crazy things. Is like, why don't we just call it what it is? Sales Talk for CEOs. I was like, okay, that's the name. And then I started interviewing founder CEOs and asking them about how they started their company and how they grew their sales. And it was a hit. So we kept doing it.
That's great. You mentioned that you really like to read. So could you share a book, podcast, or research that has impacted your career?
Oh my gosh, I have read so many books that have impacted my career. I'll mention a couple. Two of them are books that my father actually wrote. One is called Strategic Selling, and one is called Conceptual Selling. And if you are making a complex sale at your company, you should read those books because they will help you greatly. Another book that I love and I recommend all young people read is by Dale Carnegie. It's called How to Win Friends and Influence People. If you haven't read that book, please read it. My students at UNR, in the Entrepreneurship minor, where I teach a sales course, I always have them read that book, and I believe it really changes their mindset about selling. So I love that one. As far as podcasts, I love How I Built This by Guy Raz. I think that every aspiring entrepreneur and every entrepreneur should listen to that show.
Well, thank you for sharing those. If you could go back in time and give your younger self one piece of advice, what would it be?
Wow, that's an interesting an interesting thought. I guess that I would tell myself that not to work as hard. And that's going to sound crazy, right? But maybe to work smarter. Hard is not the way to work, right? People say hard work, that gets you there. I think that hard is a word that makes you feel a certain way. And I don't think it has to be hard. I think you do need to be consistent and be the best and continue to learn how to be more efficient and effective so that it isn't hard. And you can continue to grow, right? And get other people to help you so that it isn't hard. So I think I would just tell myself, it doesn't have to be hard. It can be fun and easy, and you can get people to help you, and you can continue learning so that you're always improving in what you do.
Well, thank you so much, Alice. This was really insightful, and I loved hearing about your journey.
Well, you're very welcome. I'm so glad that you're doing this podcast. I think it's just wonderful to bring this information to young people, and I'm sure a lot of other people also listen to your podcast.
Thank you.